19. Chosen One. A male ancestor doesn't play about you. Your protection runs deep. The truth does not knock politely, ask for permission to enter, or wipe its feet on the welcome mat. Sometimes it simply kicks the door completely off the hinges, shatters the glass, and drags every hidden ugly agenda out into the blinding, unapologetic light of day. Most people do not inherently hate your intelligence, your grace, or your light. They absolutely despise the terrifying lack of control they feel when they realize they are standing in the presence of someone who cannot be broken, bought, intimidated, or manipulated. They hate what your unbreakable nature forces them to realize about their own fragility. Chosen ones. If you are listening to this, you are navigating a season that feels incredibly heavy, deeply isolating, and relentlessly confusing. You have been doing the grueling, quiet work of spiritual awakening, shedding old versions of yourself, and elevating your frequency. In this process, you have been watching people you once trusted, or people who randomly inserted themselves into your orbit, suddenly turn hostile, insecure, or wildly competitive. You have seen the masks slip from faces you thought were friendly. You have felt the bizarre, unprovoked hostility radiating from individuals who seem hell-bent on tearing down your peace, mimicking your steps, or orchestrating quiet campaigns to tarnish your name. I am here to validate the absolute madness you have been experiencing. You are not crazy, you are not overthinking it, and you are certainly not the problem. What you are witnessing right now is not just a psychological meltdown. It is a profound spiritual collision. You are being guarded by something much older, much wiser, and infinitely fiercer than anything these insecure individuals possess. A male ancestor of yours, a warrior, a patriarch, an unyielding protector of your bloodline, does not play about you. Your protection runs so remarkably deep that it is actively dismantling the lives, the carefully curated facades, and the mental stability of those who are secretly plotting against you. They are exposing themselves, losing their minds, and melting down over your success. Because every single time they swing at you in the dark, their malice is intercepted by an ancestral force that violently redirects their toxic energy right back into their own reality. Let us break down exactly why their performative reality is crumbling against your spiritual architecture. But before we dive deep into the mechanics of this ancestral protection, make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, drop a comment with what point hit you hardest, and share this video with someone who needs the reminder. Let us begin. Number 1. The rapid, unexplainable exposure of their deeply hidden agendas was never a coincidence. It is a direct, undeniable, ancestral intervention. You must fundamentally understand the absolute difference between your internal architecture and their external performance. You move through this world with an authentic, hard-earned, internal alignment. Your actions are dictated by a pure heart, heavily forged in the fires of isolation, and a solid spiritual foundation that requires absolutely no audience to validate its existence. You do not need to plot, scheme, or manipulate the chessboard to get to where you are going, because your path is divinely cleared and inherently honest. The people coming for you, however, are operating on a borrowed, incredibly insecure, and entirely performative facade. They rely heavily on external validation, toxic triangulation, and the frantic manipulation of public perception just to feel a fleeting, pathetic sense of power. They deeply need the crowd to believe they are the hero, or at the very least, They desperately need the crowd to believe you are the villain. The deep psychology behind their toxic behavior is rooted in a paralyzing, suffocating fear of being entirely ordinary and profoundly inadequate. They look at your organic light and they feel the terrifying, crushing weight of their own profound emptiness. To compensate for this agonizing spiritual deficit, they try to set traps. They try to orchestrate highly controlled scenarios where you will fail or look foolish, genuinely believing that if they can successfully manufacture your downfall, they can somehow permanently steal your altitude. They are absolutely terrified of their own stagnation and their ensuing loss of control, and they rely on a manipulative script that you simply refuse to follow. But because your male ancestor does not play about you, their hidden agendas are suddenly and violently exposed without you having to lift a single physical finger. This dynamic is exactly like someone furiously stacking paper cards on a highly windy table, genuinely believing they are building an architectural masterpiece, while you are quietly and steadily stacking heavy bricks on solid bedrock. They think their delicate, petty little schemes are foolproof, but the ancestral wind blowing around your aura knocks their entire house of cards down the exact second they try to place it near you. It is deeply tragic to witness from the outside because they look so incredibly goofy and out of their depth. They are frantic, scrambling on their hands and knees to pick up the pieces of their exposed agenda, stuttering and aggressively backpedaling to explain away their obvious malice while you simply stand there completely untouched, entirely oblivious to the trap and utterly unbothered by their spectacular failure. They see the confidence but not the internal battles. They see the calm but not the immense resilience that built it. They realize far too late that they were never just dealing with your trusting nature. They were dealing with a ruthless ancestral lie detector that absolutely does not tolerate deception in your presence. Number 2. The sudden, profound physical exhaustion they experience when they attempt to mimic your unique energy is the heavy, undeniable toll of an unauthorized performance. Notice the staggering, undeniable contrast between your innate, organically sourced frequency and their frantic, siphoned fuel. Your energy, your cadence, your drive, and your creativity are generated from deep within your spirit. It is a massive, roaring wellspring that never runs dry because it is directly connected to a divine source and heavily funded by an ancient ancestral inheritance. You do not have to force your presence. It naturally and effortlessly commands the room the moment you step inside. The imitator, the insecure competitor, operates entirely differently. Their energy is parasitic, highly performative, and desperately hungry for cheap applause. Because they entirely lack their own original blueprint, they attempt to forcibly download yours. They try to talk exactly like you, dress like you, adopt your specific mannerisms, and steal your creative ideas, genuinely believing that if they can seamlessly replicate your external actions, they will somehow magically capture your internal peace. The deep psychological mechanic at play here is a profound, devastating loss of identity, coupled with a remarkably fragile ego that absolutely refuses to do the agonizing hard work of genuine self-discovery. They are utterly terrified of their own stagnation. They see you evolving, shedding old skin, and rising to breathtaking new heights, and their immediate, toxic instinct is not to learn from you, but to steal from you. However, spiritual energy cannot be counterfeited without severe physical and mental consequences. When they try to run their lives on your spiritual battery, they literally short-circuit. Your male ancestor actively denies them access to the divine grace that makes your heavy lifting look completely effortless. Watching them try to be you is exactly like watching someone pour highly combustible airplane jet fuel into a broken, rusted, completely unmaintained lawnmower engine. It absolutely does not make their machine fly. It violently blows their entire engine to pieces. They end up exhausted, burnt out, and physically drained from the sheer monumental effort it takes to wear your skin for a single day. They see the calm you possess, but they do not see the resilience required to maintain it. They see the shine, but they ignore the fire that forged it. They have to frantically post on social media 10 times a day, just to prove to strangers they are happy, while your absolute silence speaks volumes. Their mimicry becomes a frantic, tragic performance, where they are sweating profusely under the blazing stage lights of a play they were never cast in, completely crushed by a script that was fundamentally written for your soul, not theirs. Number 3, the abrupt, catastrophic backfiring of their meticulously crafted smear campaigns exposes the utter absurdity of fighting an ancestral truth with cheap, earthly lies. You operate with a reputation built on consistency, unbreakable honor, and raw, unapologetic authenticity. When you say something, it holds absolute, undeniable weight because your actions align perfectly with your words. You do not have to constantly remember the lies you told because you never told any. The people who are secretly fighting you build their entire fabricated reality on whispering networks, toxic gossip, and the aggressive manipulation of weak-minded individuals. They gather their flying monkeys, spin intricate webs of half-truths, and desperately try to poison the well before you even have a chance to drink from it. They genuinely think they are master Machiavellian strategists, operating unseen in the shadows, slowly isolating you from your community or your hard-earned opportunities. Their reliance on smear campaigns is deeply rooted in profound, pathetic cowardice and a devastating loss of control. They completely lack the spine to confront you directly because they know, on a cellular level, that your absolute truth would violently incinerate their lies on contact. They rely heavily on a scripted narrative of victimhood or righteous indignation, hoping that if they repeat the lie enough times to enough gullible people, it will magically morph into the truth. But your male ancestor operates as a divine, uncompromising auditor of the truth. He absolutely does not allow your name to be dragged through the mud without violently disrupting the lives of those spreading the filth. The spiritual mechanics here force the orchestrator to inevitably contradict their own lies in public. Maintaining a smear campaign against a highly protected chosen one is exactly like trying to hold a heavy gallon of water in a cheap, single-ply paper bag. For a brief, fleeting moment, it might actually look like they are successfully carrying the narrative, but the sheer crushing weight of the truth quickly causes the bag to dissolve, spilling their messy, toxic lies all over their own shoes. Suddenly, the people they lied to start comparing notes. The glaring inconsistencies in their stories become impossible to ignore. The orchestrator is left frantically trying to patch up a rapidly dissolving narrative, looking utterly ridiculous, untrustworthy, and deeply malicious to the very people they tried to recruit against you. They see your pristine reputation, but not the integrity that sustains it. Their smear campaign becomes the exact perfect instrument of their own social suicide, proving to the world that they were always the toxic element they loudly accused you of being. Number 4, the rapid, unexplainable removal of their enablers and toxic audiences is the direct result of your unseen protector aggressively clearing the room. There is a magnificent, undeniable contrast between your empowered, deeply intentional solitude and their desperate, suffocating need for a constant echo chamber. You are completely capable of standing entirely alone. You actively seek out solitude because you fundamentally understand it is the highly fertile soil where your greatest spiritual growth and internal alignment occurs. You are not afraid of the quiet. The highly performative individuals who attack you, however, are absolutely terrified of being alone with their own thoughts. Their entire fake reality requires an active, clapping audience, a chorus of enablers, and a constant, flowing supply of easily manipulated flying monkeys to validate their toxic behavior and protect them from their own horrifying reflection. When they set their sights on you, your male ancestor does not just neutralize their direct attacks. He begins a highly calculated, systematic dismantling of their entire social support network. The deep psychology driving their behavior is a desperate reliance on a script of perceived popularity. When they lose control of the crowd, their fragile ego sustains a massive, debilitating, narcissistic injury. The ancestor moves silently through their ranks, opening the eyes of their enablers. Suddenly, the friends who used to laugh at their cruel jokes start feeling a heavy, deeply uncomfortable energy around them. The allies who used to blindly back up their smear campaigns start noticing the glaring, irreconcilable inconsistencies in their stories. One by one, their audience members quietly stand up and leave the theater. This phenomenon creates a breathtakingly tragic scene. It is exactly like watching an arrogant, tyrannical king sitting proudly on a heavily jeweled throne, screaming loud, aggressive commands into a completely empty, barren desert. The court has entirely abandoned them. The loyal guards have fled. They are left holding a scepter that commands absolutely no one. The sheer panic of losing their enablers forces them into a frantic, hyper-manic state. They scramble desperately to find new victims to listen to their fabricated victimhood stories. But the ancestral mark of isolation is already heavily stamped on their forehead. They look intensely goofy, screaming at the wind, demanding loyalty from shadows. They see your independence, but not the strength it takes to stand alone. They are left alone with their own rotting thoughts, completely quarantined by the universe, so they can no longer infect anyone else with their disease. Number 5. The terrifying realization that your silence is not a surrender, but a spiritual loading screen for their incoming karma. You possess the profound emotional intelligence to regulate your reactions. You do not respond to every single dog that barks at you from behind a fence. You choose your battles with surgical, calculated precision because you value your internal peace far more than you value proving a point to a fool. You sit quietly, observe sharply, and allow people to show you exactly who they are without interrupting them. The performative hater fundamentally, fatally misunderstands this quietness because they are loud, hyper-reactive, and driven by an insatiable need for immediate external validation. They arrogantly assume that if you are not fighting back, you must be losing. They mistake your supreme self-control for unprotected vulnerability. The deep psychology of their miscalculation lies in their aggressive projection and their absolute reliance on a script of conflict. If someone insulted them or crossed their boundaries, their fragile ego would force them to throw a highly visible, embarrassing tantrum to protect their manufactured self-image. Because you do not throw tantrums, they assume you have no boundaries and no spiritual protection. They view your silence as permission to continuously escalate their disrespect. This is the exact, precise moment they permanently seal their own fate. Your male ancestor deliberately allows them to take the bait. He watches them cross the line, entirely fueled by their own unchecked arrogance, waiting for the perfect moment to deliver the devastating spiritual consequences. Their behavior is akin to a deeply arrogant person walking blindfolded into a highly active minefield, genuinely assuming that because the earth is completely silent, the ground must be perfectly safe to stomp on. They mistake the silence of the explosive for a lack of danger. When they finally cross that invisible boundary, the ancestral protection forcefully activates, and the blowback is absolutely devastating. They are left stunned, disoriented, and completely wrecked, entirely unable to comprehend how someone who never even raised their voice could be the source of their absolute undoing. They look frantic and intensely foolish because they loudly picked a fight with a mountain, only to be entirely crushed by an avalanche they triggered with their own big mouth. They see your quietness, but not the discipline it requires. They see your stillness, but not the ancestral army standing right behind you. Number 6. The absolute collapse of their performative dominance against the immovable object of your quiet sovereignty. Authentic authority never ever has to shout to be heard. Your power is quiet. It sits heavily and comfortably in the room the absolute moment you walk in. You do not need to loudly announce your resume, aggressively demand respect, or intimidate others to feel safe in your own body, because your sovereignty is a deep, internal state of being. The people competing with you, however, are driven by an agonizingly insecure script. Their authority is a hollow, rented costume. They have to constantly, exhaustingly remind everyone of their titles, their money, their social connections, or their perceived dominance, because they are fundamentally terrified that if they stop talking, the world will clearly see how remarkably small and terrified they truly feel. The deep psychology behind their need to ramp up this aggressive, performative dominance, specifically around you, is a profound, subconscious loss of control. Their spirit immediately recognizes the massive, unyielding guardian standing directly behind you. Even if their conscious mind arrogantly believes they are superior to you, their subconscious is absolutely terrified. They feel the heavy, uncompromising gaze of your male ancestor bearing down on their fragile ego. To overcompensate for this internal terror, they puff out their chest, they talk over you, they try to publicly belittle your accomplishments, and they frantically attempt to establish themselves as the undeniable alpha in the room. They are desperately fighting a spiritual panic attack by acting aggressively arrogant. This dynamic is perfectly mirrored by the metaphor of a tiny, trembling chihuahua barking furiously and relentlessly at a massive, sleeping lion through a thick pane of impenetrable glass. The dog is loud, frantic, and completely exhausting itself with aggressive posturing, purely because there is glass protecting it from the reality of the situation. The lion does not even bother to open a single eye. Your attacker's performance is highly tragic and incredibly goofy because they are completely frying their central nervous system, trying to prove a dominance they absolutely do not possess against a protection they cannot possibly penetrate. They see your non-reaction as weakness, completely unaware that your quietness is simply you, allowing them to embarrass themselves. The ancestor waits for the perfect moment to shatter the glass, leaving their performative dominance completely collapsed in a heap of their own making. Number 7. The sudden, catastrophic drying up of their resources when they foolishly attempt to build on your stolen blueprints. There is a brutal, undeniable contrast between your abundant, infinite flow of creative and spiritual energy and their heavily blocked, completely stagnant channels. Because you are deeply tapped into the divine source and heavily backed by your lineage, your ideas, your blessings, and your opportunities constantly and effortlessly regenerate. You are a living, breathing well of water. They, however, are essentially cheap plastic buckets with massive holes violently punched in the bottom. When they steal your ideas, mimic your projects, or try to aggressively siphon your network, they arrogantly assume they are taking a brilliant shortcut to success. The psychological motivation driving them is sheer laziness, a terrifying fear of their own lack of originality, and a fragile ego that demands the rewards of the chosen one without ever putting in the grueling work of the chosen one. They genuinely believe the blueprint is all that matters, completely ignoring the deeply spiritual fact that the blueprint only works when it is empowered by the original architect's specific spirit. When they try to blindly build their counterfeit empire using your stolen bricks, your male ancestor steps in and initiates a severe, uncompromising karmic embargo. Suddenly their resources completely dry up. The connections they stole turn sour and reject them. The ideas they copied fall completely flat, generating zero engagement, zero respect, and zero profit. It is exactly like watching someone enthusiastically water a cheap plastic plant, throwing fertilizer on it and screaming in frustration, wondering why it is not growing, while right next to them, your authentic oak tree thrives effortlessly in the rain. Your protective ancestral force absolutely ensures that nothing they steal from you will ever bear fruit in their toxic soil. They become deeply frustrated, throwing massive, embarrassing tantrums behind closed doors, completely unable to comprehend why the exact same actions that brought you massive success are bringing them nothing but public embarrassment and profound financial and energetic stagnation. They look incredibly goofy and frantic. They realize they stole a high-performance car, but completely forgot to steal the engine. And now they are forced to desperately push it uphill while the entire world watches their ridiculous, agonizing struggle. They see the harvest, but not the soil. They see the blueprint, but completely lack the spirit to bring it to life. Number 8. The unexplainable, suffocating paranoia that fiercely grips their mind because they secretly know they touched something highly sacred and entirely unauthorized. You sleep deeply and peacefully amidst the most chaotic, swirling storms because your internal architecture is sparkling clean. You have absolutely nothing to hide, no intricate lies to keep track of, and no malicious, vindictive plots to manage. Your conscience is completely clear, allowing you to rest in the beautiful sanctuary of your own healing. The perpetrators who continually attempt to mimic or destroy you, however, live in a constant, agonizing state of hypervigilance and sheer terror. They are completely relying on a fragile script of deception, which requires massive, unsustainable amounts of mental bandwidth to maintain. When they deliberately attack a chosen one, an intense, inescapable paranoia permanently sets into their psyche. The deep psychology at play is a total loss of control fueled by an incredibly fragile ego that knows it has committed a fatal error. They may outwardly project confidence, but internally, they are rapidly, violently decaying. They start experiencing profound insomnia in the quietest, safest rooms. Their fragile ego attempts to convince them that they got away with their malice, but their spirit absolutely knows they have touched a live, spiritual wire. Your ancestral protector ensures that their own guilty conscience becomes their most relentless, cruel torturer. They constantly look over their shoulder, deeply suspicious of their own friends, entirely terrified that the universe is plotting its immediate, violent revenge against them. Watching them spiral into paranoia is exactly like watching someone desperately trying to run away from their own shadow in a small room that is brilliantly lit from every conceivable angle. There is absolutely nowhere to hide from the light. Every minor inconvenience in their life suddenly feels like a highly targeted, personal punishment from a higher power. If they get a flat tire, they panic. If someone does not text them back immediately, they assume a massive conspiracy is forming against them. Their behavior becomes frantic, erratic, and highly suspicious to absolutely everyone around them. They look deeply tragic, exposing their own profound guilt simply by acting exactly like a fugitive when no one is even chasing them. They are entirely driven mad by the heavy, silent gaze of the male ancestor they foolishly provoked, realizing their perceived victory was just the activation of their own psychological torment. Number 9. The visceral, agonizing physical discomfort they feel in the presence of your clean architecture, masked as unexplained irritation. Observe the stark, magnificent contrast between your pure, clarifying frequency and their murky, intensely hidden intentions. When you walk into a room, you bring an atmosphere of absolute truth, brilliant light, and high vibrational alignment. You do not even have to say a single word. Your mere presence alters the molecular structure of the environment. For people who are heavily masked, deeply insecure, and harboring covert malice, your frequency is absolutely agonizing to endure. They operate strictly in the shadows, relying entirely on ambiguity, manipulation, and deception to survive. The deep psychology behind their unprovoked irritation and sudden outbursts is the soul's literal, violent allergy to truth. When they are near you, their fragile ego realizes it cannot control the narrative, and their lower-level attachments begin to violently agitate. They feel a visceral physical discomfort in their chest, their skin crawls, and they become inexplicably angry or incredibly anxious just by being in your immediate proximity. This dynamic is the exact equivalent of vampires standing in direct, unapologetic, blistering sunlight. They will often try to mask this agonizing discomfort by picking petty fights, rolling their eyes, or making passive-aggressive, entirely unprovoked comments, desperately attempting to drag your frequency down to a level where they can breathe comfortably again. But your male ancestor operates as an impenetrable atmospheric shield. He does not allow your beautiful light to be dimmed simply for their comfort. Instead, he turns the spiritual heat up. The more authentic you are, the more they sweat, watching them squirm in their seats, completely unable to articulate why they are so intensely triggered by your peaceful existence, is deeply revealing and incredibly tragic. They look frantic, completely out of control, heavily burdened by a script that you refuse to participate in. They are forced to confront the glaring reality of their own spiritual filth simply because you dared to stand near them while being completely clean. They desperately want to believe they hate your personality, but the absolute undeniable truth is they are physically repulsed by their own terrifying inability to exist in the pure light that naturally surrounds you. They see the radiance but entirely lack the internal purity required to stand within it. Number 10. The tragic comedy of them attempting to outmaneuver a spiritual lineage using cheap, low-level earthly tactics. There is an enormous echoing contrast between your divine backing and their desperate, entirely physical hustle. You carry a specific, undeniable, heavy anointing. Doors swing open for you in rooms you never even knocked on. You effortlessly attract wisdom, favor, and massive resources simply by existing in a state of authentic alignment. This is your undeniable spiritual inheritance, heavily guarded and actively administered by your ancestors. The insecure mimics, attempting to compete with you, operate strictly in the dense, physical, earthly realm. Their blessings are bought, borrowed, forcefully engineered, or blatantly stolen. They fundamentally believe that success is merely a formula of networking, manipulating, and stepping on the right necks to get ahead, because they are terrified of falling behind and deeply fearful of their own complete spiritual bankruptcy. They hustle backward. The deep psychology behind their behavior is a fragile ego desperately trying to mask a total loss of spiritual control. They see you get promoted, recognized, or elevated, and they immediately try to outwork you using cheap, frantic, manipulative tactics. They schmooze the boss, they buy fake followers, they fabricate a lifestyle they absolutely cannot sustain, and they exhaust themselves trying to manufacture the organic favor that effortlessly rests on your life. They refuse to follow the script of divine timing, instead relying on their own frantic, anxious need to control outcomes. This deeply painful performance is like someone showing up to a rigorous spiritual audit, wearing heavy, gaudy jewelry they clearly cannot afford, proudly displaying maxed-out credit cards as proof of their immense wealth. It means absolutely nothing to the unseen forces judging the room. They might score a temporary earthly win. They might get the superficial title or the momentary applause, but the absolute tragedy lies in the sheer hollowness of their victory. They work themselves to the absolute bone to beat you, only to arrive at the finish line completely empty, devoid of peace, and heavily burdened by the crushing debt of their own fake reality. It is profoundly goofy and intensely frantic to watch them aggressively celebrate a cheap plastic trophy while you quietly inherit the entire kingdom, fully supported by a lineage that absolutely cannot be outworked by an ego. Number 11. The fatal miscalculation of mistaking your grace, empathy, and forgiveness for unprotected whackness. One of the most beautiful distinguishing traits of a chosen one is your immense capacity for grace. You operate with an open heart, offering genuine second chances, deep empathy, and a willingness to see the good in people. You prefer peace over conflict. Contrast your human mercy with the ruthless, calculating, completely zero-tolerance justice of your ancestral guardian. The highly performative, toxic individuals in your life operate like spiritual predators. They look at your kindness and they see a glaring, exploitable vulnerability. The deep psychology of this predator is entirely based on projecting their own malice. Because they would never offer grace unless they were too weak to fight, they assume your grace means you completely lack a spine. Their fragile ego genuinely believes that your kindness is permanent blindness. They think they can eternally reside in your energy field, repeatedly disrespecting your boundaries, plotting your demise in the shadows while comfortably eating at your table. What they entirely fail to account for is the absolute, uncompromising masculine energy of your unseen protector. When you lay down your physical sword to offer forgiveness, your male ancestor immediately draws his massive spiritual blade. They push you one too many times, relying on a script where you continuously play the weeping victim or the endless martyr. But you refuse the script. Your ancestor steps in and violently severs their access. This fatal miscalculation is exactly like mistaking the polite, professional smile of a zookeeper for the actual temperament of the massive, starving apex predator resting in the cage behind them. They arrogantly poke the cage, completely oblivious to the danger. When the spiritual retribution hits them blindside, it is swift, it is devastating, and it leaves them absolutely bewildered. They are left staggering, trying to comprehend how their foolproof plan to walk all over you resulted in their own utter devastation. They look frantic and deeply goofy, aggressively demanding to know why you are not saving them from the consequences of their own actions. They see your soft heart, but they do not see the iron shield completely surrounding it. Their desperate attempts to exploit your kindness only serve to trigger an ancestral wrath that systematically dismantles their arrogance, proving that your grace was the only thing delaying their absolute destruction. Number 12. The complete and total stagnation of their timeline while they obsessively monitor yours. The universe operates on a strict, completely unforgiving economy of energy. When you pour your precious life force into your own healing, creation, and alignment, your timeline naturally, beautifully accelerates. You move from glory to glory, constantly expanding. The person who targets you, however, takes their own precious life force and weaponizes it entirely against your destiny. Contrast your rapid, organic expansion and deep healing with their absolute, petrifying stagnation, because they are completely obsessed with monitoring your progress, tearing down your achievements, and trying to block your incoming blessings. They completely abandon the construction of their own life. The deep psychology of this behavior is rooted in a highly toxic envy that entirely blinds them to the reality of time, and a fragile ego that absolutely refuses to focus on its own massive shortcomings. They genuinely believe that if they can just halt your progress, they will somehow magically feel better about their own profound lack of momentum. But spiritual law aggressively dictates that you cannot build your own house while you are entirely focused on burning down your neighbors. When they attack a chosen one, protected by a fierce male ancestor, their timeline is instantly and permanently frozen. The ancestor absolutely ensures that not a single blessing reaches them while they harbor malice toward you. You will notice that their life just stops. They do not grow, they do not evolve, and they do not achieve anything of real substance. They are hopelessly trapped in a temporal loop of their own bitter making. Watching this dynamic is exactly like observing someone furiously trying to anchor a massive, soaring hot air balloon with a piece of cheap dental floss, completely ignoring the blazing fact that their own balloon has violently crashed and is currently on fire. They are so busy glaring at your altitude with seething jealousy that they entirely fail to realize their feet are permanently stuck in the mud. Their frantic behavior becomes a desperate, intensely goofy attempt to force progress where the universe has strictly mandated a complete halt. They completely exhaust themselves trying to move forward, utterly unable to understand that their toxic obsession with your destruction is the exact, heavy anchor keeping them permanently chained to the bottom of the ocean. Number 13. The violent shattering of their entirely fabricated illusions of superiority when they collide with your innate sovereignty. Toxic, highly insecure people operate on a heavily contrived, entirely false social hierarchy. They rely exclusively on external markers, status, popularity, manipulative charm, and loud arrogance to falsely place themselves above others. They genuinely believed, in their deeply delusional state, that they were somehow your superior. They expect you to bow to their demands, to shrink in their presence, and to validate their inflated sense of self-importance. Contrast your authentic, deeply rooted, spiritual authority, which requires absolutely zero external validation to exist, with their contrived, incredibly fragile social dominance that requires constant, exhausting maintenance. You move through the world with the silent, undeniable confidence of a sovereign king or queen in your own right. The psychology behind their desperate need to feel superior is an absolute terror of their own mediocrity. Their ego is a fragile pane of glass, holding back a raging ocean of inadequacy. When they realize you absolutely do not care about their fake hierarchy, and that you refuse to read the submissive script they handed you, their entire worldview violently collapses. They realize they are a mere peasant who foolishly threw rocks at a highly protected monarch. When the deep, heavy, masculine protection of your lineage is fully activated, their false hierarchy is instantly and violently vaporized. The psychological injury they suffer here is massive, totally debilitating, and entirely irreversible. It is the ultimate narcissistic wound to fully realize that they are, and always have been, spiritually outranked by the exact person they continuously tried to belittle. This is perfectly encapsulated by the metaphor of a poorly trained mall security guard, armed with a cheap plastic badge and a wildly inflated sense of authority, arrogantly trying to arrest a highly decorated, battle-tested, 5-star general who is heavily backed by an entire military fleet. The general does not argue. The general absolutely does not yell. The general simply looks at the guard with a mixture of profound pity and absolute, unbothered calm. And the guard's entire fabricated reality crumbles into dust. They realize, much to their absolute horror, that they were playing a silly, insignificant earthly game while you are operating on an entirely different, completely untouchable dimensional plane. The illusion of their superiority violently shatters into a million jagged pieces, leaving them entirely humiliated, broken, frantically trying to piece their ego back together, and acutely aware of their own deep, unfixable, and pathetic inferiority. Number 14. The ultimate ego death in realizing they waged war on a heavily guarded lineage, not a solitary, unprotected individual. The foundational, fatal delusion of the people secretly competing with you is their deeply arrogant belief that this is a fair, one-on-one battle. They look at you, one single human being, and they calculate that if they just work a little harder, lie a little better, or heavily manipulate a few more people to their side, they can eventually overpower you. They view this as a mortal, physical competition. But here is the majestic, terrifying truth that you know, and they completely fail to grasp. They are absolutely not fighting you. They have foolishly picked a fight with an entire lineage. They are attempting to arm wrestle a spiritual patriarch who carries the accumulated strength of generations. The contrast in firepower is absolutely astronomical. The hater is fighting with the severely limited resources of their own fragile ego, their petty bank account, and their shallow, entirely transactional social connections. You are fighting with the limitless, infinite, unshakable backing of the spiritual realm. Your male ancestor stands directly behind you, a towering monolith of wisdom, protection, and divine authority. The psychology of this final realization is total ego death and the forced, deeply humiliating submission to reality. Their intense fear of losing control culminates in the absolute realization that they never had any control to begin with. The competitor's toxic obsession with you rapidly becomes their own personal purgatory. No matter how many cheap, insignificant victories they think they score in the physical world, they always wake up feeling vastly inferior. They can never seem to gain the high ground because the mountain they are trying to climb keeps miraculously growing taller. They are desperately trying to outrun a shadow, completely unaware that the shadow belongs to an ancient giant. This drives their behavior into realms of absolute absurdity. It is the breathtaking metaphor of someone angrily pushing against a single, beautifully carved pillar, sweating, cursing, and using all their might to knock it down. For years they push, completely obsessed with destroying this one pillar. And then finally, they take a massive step back, look up, and realize with absolute, trembling horror that the pillar they have been trying to destroy is the central support beam, holding up the entire sky. If they had actually succeeded, the crushing weight of the universe would have flattened them instantly. The Ancestor allowed them to aggressively push, just to let them entirely exhaust themselves, knowing the pillar would never ever move. The total vindication of the Chosen One is found exactly in this moment. You never had to strike back. You never had to explain yourself. You just had to stand there, deeply protected by an ancient lineage that simply does not play about you. When you zoom out and look at the absolute totality of this dynamic, the frantic mimicking, the premature exposure of their hidden agendas, the rapidly ricocheting karma, the profound isolation they face, and the heavy silence of your defense, one absolute truth becomes completely impossible to ignore. They were never just attacking your physical actions, your job, or your words. They were maliciously targeting your energetic alignment, your profound spiritual peace, and the deep, unshakable truth of exactly who you are. They desperately wanted to corrupt your spiritual architecture because their own is rotting from the inside out. But they severely, fatally underestimated the heavy ancestral architecture that firmly holds you up. This masculine guardian energy, this fierce, unyielding protector from your bloodline, absolutely does not play about you. It never has, and it never will. The universe deliberately allowed this heavy season of exposure not to punish you, but to vividly, undeniably demonstrate just how deeply you are loved, fiercely guarded, and flawlessly guided by the unseen world. You are not a regular person, and therefore you absolutely cannot be destroyed by regular earthly malice. Let this be your ultimate empowerment. You absolutely do not need to seek revenge. You do not need to lower your high vibration to explain your reality to individuals who are deeply, entirely committed to misunderstanding your light. You do not need to step out of your character to perform for an audience of insecure, miserable critics. You do not need to perform, to panic, or to violently prove your worth to individuals who are fundamentally incapable of perceiving your immense value. Your only job right now is to keep beautifully growing, to remain fiercely authentic, to honor the heavy bloodline that relentlessly watches over you, and to continue laying your heavy bricks on solid ground. Let them play with their flimsy cards in the wind. Let them completely unravel. Let the karmic boomerang do the heavy lifting while you sit peacefully in the absolute fortress of your own healing. Keep evolving and keep shining that blinding light directly into the dark corners of their performative reality. If this deep dive resonated with your spirit and validated the heavy season you are currently navigating, make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, Drop a comment with what point hit you hardest, and share this video with someone who needs the reminder. Stay chosen, stay blessed.